Most businesses only focus on growing and expanding, and they give little to no attention to their exit strategies until after exit is staring them in the face. Learn here at Boosting Business Value, brought to you by Blue Sky Business Resources. You'll discover how to shape a more durable and saleable business, and how to implement a powerful, well-planned, and rewarding exit. Join Dr. David Gruder and Jason Tazinkowicz as they deliver actionable tips for lower middle market company owners, executives, and their trusted advisors. Find out where your business currently stands, how you can meet your revenue objectives more reliably, and how to grow your venture to the next level, all with a smooth and fruitful exit in mind. Here are your hosts, Dr. David and Jason.
Human capital plays a massive role in the success or failure of M&A transactions and all other types of successions. To reduce change of control anxiety, 3 human capital dimensions must be attended to in an integrated way: the seller, the buyer, and the company personnel. In this episode, we unpack what you can do in your business starting today to put yourself in the best position when it's time for a change of control. And for those of you who are new to the show, I'm Jason Tazinkowicz, Chief Operations Officer for Blue Sky Business Resources. And with me, as always, is my good friend and co-host, Dr. David Gruder, Blue Sky's business lifecycle exit planning and post-acquisition psychologist. Hey, David, how you doing?
Oh, I'm happy. I'm always happy to be with you, Jason. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Well, we're going to lead off with talking a little bit about the kinds of challenges that people experience around the human capital dimension of success and failure in M&A. So go ahead and lead it off.
I think this is going to be a fun one, Doctor. And starting off, it's always important to start by looking at the seller. The seller's at the heart of this whole transition. They're the ones who presumably built the business to the point that it's at today. A massive amount of their personal capital as well as their retirement capital is invested into this business. And there are a lot of question marks in their heads, and that plays into emotions as well as financial well-being. What we really want to do is talk to them about how can you build a team to thrive post-acquisition by minimizing the seller's proprietary knowledge base. Not saying that we're going to lobotomize the seller, but we're going to help them distribute that knowledge and experience throughout the rest of the team. And then help them to understand who on the team is not going to want to be part of a change of control and why that might be. Sometimes you'll have great people that don't want to be a part of a change of control because there are just too many unknowns. And if we can help overcome those unknowns, we can turn a liability into an asset. But we have to face those things first. We want to talk about helping a business owner, the ultimate seller, understand how good succession planning can achieve continuity for the business as well as continuity for them leveraging themselves into the next phase.
Mm-hmm. Quite well said. And you've covered a lot of territory there. I'm going to go ahead and do a somewhat deeper dive into the part of that having to do with team and personnel. Because when it comes to any kind of succession planning, the personnel are always in a state of not knowing or anxiety, especially if the rumor mill is saying, well, this is in the offing, but the owner hasn't come clean with us. And that's when people can really start generating all kinds of stories about what's going on, most of which are probably not going to be accurate, but you might believe anyhow. It's all about acquisition anxiety or succession anxiety. For some in a company, they want to exit when the owner exits. And for others, they want job continuity. They want to continue after the owner exits. And so it's very important at the right time, and that's a big underline on that one, at the right time, to disclose to personnel that the company's developmental stage is one where it's starting to move toward a succession of some kind, and what the succession is, and for the owner to make it really, really clear to the personnel that those who want to stay, not only the owner going to support that in happening, but to map out some very specific things. And one of those things is with people who want to stay, to help them become indispensable. In other words, for the owner to transfer appropriate portions of their own indispensability to the right people in their company who want to stay post succession. And then to also be clear about who is thinking they're going to leave around the time that the succession occurs, to work out with them a succession plan that not only brings on board someone who is going to be filling the responsibilities that the person that's leaving is going to be filling, but also to make sure that the timing for that transition happens in a way that doesn't inadvertently undermine the succession process in the business, the acquisition process, or whatever other form of succession is right for that business to undergo. I'm thinking about a merger that I was part of or consulting to with a company where there were a key person who really didn't want to stay after the acquisition, and where we had to really carefully structure how they were going to leave, when they were going to leave, and how they were going to onboard whoever was going to be taking their responsibilities onto themselves. And then a lot of reassurance around the people who wanted to stay and giving them a plan or helping them develop a plan, like I said before, for how they were going to become so indispensable that the new acquirer would be a fool to let them go after the acquisition.
Yeah, indispensable and inspired for the next phase, I think, are two key points that you brought up. And the other thing that I love about what you said, and that ties into what I had said about the seller, is in my work, and I'm sure you've seen this too, as the seller, as the business owner starts going through the process of letting go of the reins and realizing how successful the team below that business owner can be when they're empowered to take over some of that knowledge and skill set, then they also start recognizing those employees within the team that have sequestered and are protecting knowledge and skills that are becoming a threat. So these things are really well tied together. And I think that you brought up some extraordinary points. And then the last stakeholder group that we're going to talk about is the buyer group. And this is a tricky one because in most cases, the buyers are the most well-educated and informed members of the M&A transaction process. And with that information comes some interesting negotiational positions. They understand better than anybody else unless we can get to them first. And when sellers don't get educated on M&A transactions, they don't understand the failure rate, the 70 to 80% of M&A transactions that fail to meet the investment objectives of the buyers. And when you don't understand that, then it's really hard to get out in front of all the risks that cause those failures. So when a buyer comes in fully acclimated and attuned to the things that can make this investment go awry, they're using all of those potential failures in their due diligence, in their value determination, in their vetting process, and ultimately, if they're great buyers, in their integration planning. And so if the buyer and the seller and the team are all equally well informed and they're working to mitigate those risks, now we have a really good chance of beating the odds and overcoming those terrifying statistics and creating a successful change of control.
That's so true. And what I want to underscore in what you were saying is that there are plenty of sophisticated buyers that are very aware of how important it is for them to be able to integrate into the company that they're acquiring and to establish effective collaboration with personnel. Rarely, in my experience, do they actually know how to do that well without some assistance, without some facilitation, without consulting.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these statistics show that assume that 5 to 10% get lucky. And that leaves you with around 20% of the buyers that are out there actually putting money down to acquire businesses that are well-versed, attuned, and capable of doing this work. So no matter which side of the transaction you're on, it becomes really important to have a good team, good planning, and solid preparation. And that's going to move us into this next topic, which is what don't these stakeholders know that are causing the biggest challenges? And how could a little bit of education and information and planning overcome these glaring gaps in visibility and knowledge? We all have blind spots, but this is a place where blind spots can really hurt you.
Oh, can they ever? So with business owners are so often working in their business rather than on their business that they are just dealing with whatever is up today or next week or next month. They're not pulling back to that 40,000 foot level and really looking at the arc of the business in a master plan kind of way. And because of that, an awful lot of sellers don't realize that wherever they are in their business's development, if they're ultimately envisioning themselves going through some sort of succession planning, no matter what form that might take, now is the time to start working on that, not just before you're starting the M&A or other succession process. Now is the time to start laying that groundwork. And there's a saying, how you do anything is how you do everything. And this applies to business development and to M&A. When a business owner is not thinking long-term, this affects everything. It affects all of their decision-making, not just over the next 6 months or over the next year. It affects the trajectory of the business, and it affects whether or not the business is ever going to grow to the point that it needs to grow in order to meet the owner's exit needs financially. And so this is really a big deal. No seller that you or I have met, Jason, I think, realizes that secrets with the team and the potential acquirer kill deals, even when those secrets seem well-intentioned. So this is another dimension of this. The sellers notoriously want to minimize the importance of disclosure of certain types of things that have to be disclosed, very much like a real estate transaction where the seller is saying to the real estate agent, well, do we have to disclose that? Well, the truth is that business transactions are only as sick as their secrets, that the more secrets a business is withholding, a seller is withholding from a potential buyer, the higher the inevitability likelihood is that is going to bite them in the butt later on. And so as uncomfortable as it might be to do full disclosure, it's crucial to have a consultant who is going to help you as an owner identify exactly what needs to be disclosed that the seller is hoping and praying they might not have to do.
Yeah.
How to do that disclosure in a good way.
Exactly. In a good way with the proper timing. And that goes for disclosure internally with the team as well as externally. One of the things that I find, the more that I do this, the more that I work with business owners, is every single thing that they're afraid to disclose has a solution. And I try to remind business owners that when you're buying a house, most people would like to buy a house that they can move in and not have to worry about for at least 5 to 10 years, right? Some people want to buy that house and spend their entire life fixing it up, but that's a small number of the people. In the business world, it's totally different, right? Business buyers want to be able to contribute that missing link to their investment because they're looking for that investment to grow in value. And they're expecting that them and the resources that they bring to the table are going to be capable of bringing that business to the next level. So in a lot of cases, when you go ugly early and when an owner says, here's what I don't bring to the table that the business really needs to go forward, those are the most successful transactions. And that goes to the team as well. One of the things that you always hear those cliches, cultural eat strategy for breakfast, and then strategy will have a nice light dinner. But the reality is you can't have one without the other. And so many companies, the executive team spend a ton of time. They'll probably hire an accountant or a consultant. Maybe they'll go to a nice resort somewhere and spend a week working on drafting their vision and their mission and their values, and they'll frame them and they'll have something beautiful hanging up in their lobby that says, this is who we are. And that's where the work ends. And when the culture that you have in a picture frame is different than the culture that you have on the operating floor, you've got a problem. Strategy is not going to do you any good in that situation. Culture is killing you. And that's where these debates between culture and strategy really start to happen. But when you're working a succession plan, when you're thinking about the long-term future of the company, the culture and the team are what's going to get it there. The team is what's going to carry the brand from this owner and this leadership into the future with new leadership. And so understanding what the real culture is will help to identify what kind of buyer this culture can assimilate with and what is going to bring the empowerment and the enthusiasm through to that team to carry the business forward into the future.
Well said. And I'm going to actually piggyback on that last thing that you said, because there are really two aspects we want to draw out about blind spots that buyers have or that are related to the buyer. And one of those two actually doesn't have to do with the buyer as much as it has to do with the seller, which is that it's important for the owner and the team to develop clarity about what kind of buyer they're looking for. Choosing a better buyer is really, really important. And who is a right buyer isn't determined by the buyer. Who is a right buyer is supposed to be determined by the seller and their company. So it's really important, just as in dating, it's so wise to kind of develop a treasure map of the traits and the qualities that you're looking for in a partner and the deal breakers that, despite anything that's good in a relationship with someone, are not going to make the relationship capable of being durable over time. The same thing is true with buyers. It's up to the sellers and the team to really develop a portrait of what a better buyer really looks like, so that they're not settling for a buyer that might be willing to buy the company for a little bit more money, but the hell that's going to be paid for that little bit more money is nowhere near worth the little bit more money. And then the other thing from the buyer perspective is actually about the buyer themselves, which is so often buyers will think they can come in and remake a successful company in their image without paying a price in terms of culture deterioration, attrition, customer loss, brand integrity diminishment, and things like that. And it's one thing, like you were talking about earlier, Jason, it's one thing for a buyer to have some specific objectives that they have in mind because of choosing to acquire a company that they want to help bring about. And that's really good and it's laudable. And those things need to be integrated into the company rather than a buyer coming in as a tyrant saying, okay, I'm going to remake the company in my own image. So many companies have imploded when that's happened. One of them, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but one of my favorite examples of that was when Whole Foods was originally sold. Well, actually, it wasn't a sale. They went public. They went through an IPO. And so the buyers were now the shareholders, and their agenda was collectively way different from what made Whole Foods, what created immense customer loyalty among those who were immense customers, loyal customers of Whole Foods. And Whole Paycheck, which was Whole Foods' nickname originally, turned after the IPO, the nickname turned to Whole Fraud from Whole Foods, because what made Whole Foods a leader in its segment of the grocery industry got undermined by the shareholders, and they lost crucial personnel and they lost crucial customers as a result, which in turn, of course, made an opening for Amazon to actually acquire Whole Foods ultimately. So these are really important things for buyers to be aware of and to be consulting with experts on in order to do an acquisition in a way that meets the buyer's objectives without inadvertently undermining what made the company work in the first place and attractive to the buyer to buy to begin with.
So true. And you bring up a lot of points that remind me of clients of mine in my early years. And not only the importance of the buyer having the right focus and spending enough time listening to what the seller is verbally as well as demonstrably saying to them. But it also is important for the whole team to be on the same page. I had a pallet company I was working on. It was one of my first deals. And you think pallet companies, how much more sexy could it get, right? These guys, this was a $40 million company.
Mm.
In the first 3 weeks of me affecting my strategic marketing plan, I had 68 confidentiality agreements signed. Going through the process and getting to indications of interest, I had 19 prospective buyers that were invited to go look at the facility. And I mean, this was a really exciting deal. Everybody was excited about it. We're getting great valuations, all of those things. And for those of you who haven't been through the process, normally you'll get about a dozen confidentiality agreements signed in a good transaction. And you'll usually invite between 2 and 6 businesses for a site visit. So when we're talking about 68 and 19, these are big numbers. And I was excited as the representative of the seller of all the opportunity. The CEO was literally doing payroll with a paper and pencil on ledger paper. All of the flow of orders was done in soft copy with sheets of paper that were stuck on bulletin boards. And as I was seeing the growth trajectory of this company in its very provincial management and leadership form, I personally was very excited about the opportunity to modernize and automate. And I didn't ask a lot of questions of the CEO and of my client, the seller, about their thoughts of the long-term vision of this company. And so when I invited private equity buyers and strategic buyers in, every single one of them to a person was pointing out, oh, we could put an ERP system over here and we could streamline the flow of this and we can get rid of these bulletin boards and go digital copy and we can put a server in this closet and all of this stuff. They're talking about how they can modernize the plant. And during this week of back-to-back site visits, I'm watching the demeanor and the enthusiasm of my client dropping further and further and further as these buyers are seeing more value in the company. And ultimately, my client ended up walking away from a transaction that could have gone from $40 to $47 million because he didn't like what he was hearing about the amount of wholesale changes that were going to happen to his company. In that one, I dropped the ball because I didn't gain the right perspective before I invited people into this gentleman's home. And so I didn't coach them the right way. But also, none of the buyers were paying any attention to the fact that this is how the business was run for 36 years. And maybe throwing computers in on day one would be seen as detrimental. Not one of the 19 buyers were sensitive to that. And that was something that killed the deal. And so it's really important for everybody to have the same perspective and to understand what the perspective of the business that's being acquired is before trying to fit a buyer into that so that we as the support team can guide the buyer to an appropriate perspective of timing as well.
Mm-hmm. And before we move into our final section, I want to underscore something that's embedded in your incredibly valuable and self-disclosing story. And that is that these acquirers were coming in and thinking tactically before there were decisions made strategically. And when tactics precede strategies or substitute for strategy, that is not a formula for a sustainable business. Strategy comes first because strategy is what attention in such a way that right matched tactics can be selected. And coming in and presuming changes to make tactically before there's agreement about strategic direction really reveals an unsophisticated buyer.
A whole bunch of them, actually.
Yeah, a whole bunch of them.
Yeah. So the good news was that was a huge learning experience for me early on in my work doing this type of advisory. So all of my subsequent clients have been able to benefit from me eating a whole lot of crow. The goal is, and part of the reason we're doing these podcasts, Doctor, is so that business owners don't ever have to get themselves into that situation and that advisory teams are seeing around corners better.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Learn from our mistakes. Don't repeat them.
Exactly.
So as we move into the next section, which is about a roadmap, this is about how to really create indispensable teams and reduce change of control anxiety, what to look for in the way of a roadmap, in the way of a solution that addresses this, that reduces change of control anxiety. So go ahead and lead this off about the seller, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, for the seller, the real key is always going to be taking that first step. The first step is the scariest. But for a seller, taking that first step is really working on building a team around themselves. And that's their executive team within the operation. It's their advisory team that supports the operation. And then it's the lifestyle team, the first personal financial advisor, the spouse, the family, getting them all into the conversation too, because even though this is the seller's business, it affects the whole family. And so having those three teams to bounce ideas off of, to be candid and to be comfortable in that discomfort is going to be really important. And then as those teams get comfortable with one another and start working through the what ifs about the future, then they can all work together to create a program for thoughtful transparency. As much as I tell everybody, problems happen in the shadows, turn the lights on and let's fix this, there's a time and a place for turning those lights on. And only with a team can we hold each other's emotions in check and ask the next question. Okay, so then what? And help each other make those good, thoughtful decisions about when to be transparent, how to be transparent, and with whom do we share what levels of transparency. And that's really where a seller starts. And the more they get good at those things, and the more they get strong within their teams, the higher the likelihood of not only successful outcomes, but control over the outcomes. And that's really what's going to make or break the future for the seller and the business that they're controlling.
Absolutely. So this is the kind of assistance to look for in the kinds of consultants that you use with your business. And that's from the seller perspective. From the team perspective, it's important to have the right kind of consultant who can help you identify the gap between the stated and lived values and culture versus to identify where those gaps are and to close that gap so that what a company says its culture and values are is actually what a company is living as its culture and values, because that's part of what makes a company incredibly attractive to the right kind of buyer. Mm-hmm. The second thing is, as we mentioned earlier, discover who does and doesn't plan to stay post-acquisition. Again, at the right time, when it's the right time for that discussion and everything that surrounds that. So who plans to stay? You help them become indispensable in what they do. Who plans to not stay? You help them develop a transition plan, a succession plan for their role so that they've onboarded someone to take their place, and where the timing for all of that is not just good for that employee, but good for the company and the acquisition or the selling process. And then the last part with the team is have someone on board as a consultant who can help you directly draw out and address your team's anxieties about succession, because it doesn't help when an owner says, "Oh, don't worry about that. I'll handle it." That may be true for some owners, but it's not useful.
Exactly.
The owner has to be able to convey their clear understanding about what those anxieties about succession are that their people have, and needs to be able to convey a plan for how they will help and how the team will help deal with those succession wrinkles and complexities and dimensions that need to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear a lot of business owners saying, I'm nowhere near exiting. Why would I stress my team out with this? And my response is always going to be the same. The most certain statistic I can ever throw out and know that I'm always going to be right on the statistic is that 100% of business owners leave their business. They don't all do it standing up, but they all leave. And so when you have something within your business that has a 40 to 50% odd of happening, but it's going to be deeply impactful for your business, you and your team plan a contingency for if that happens. If you have something that you know is certain, why wouldn't you plan a contingency for when that certainty arises? A lot of the people that you mentioned that initially are going to plan to exit during the change of control, they may not have good reasons for that plan.
That's right.
And there may be a chance with the team discussing those anxieties that they'll change their mind and they'll become empowered, indispensable, and future leaders of the team. That will only ever happen by addressing the anxieties and putting them to rest versus letting them fester because you don't want to stress somebody out.
I love that you added that.
Thanks. And then obviously we got to go back to the buyer. And this goes back to what you were saying in the last little section, which is understanding what makes a good buyer. A buyer needs to do some real soul searching. And like I mentioned early on, they want to provide value beyond a checkbook to make their investment grow bigger. That's their point of buying a business versus just playing in the stock market. And so they need to know what their cultural style is. They need to understand what they bring to the table, and they need to understand how to determine where they're a good fit as an acquisition partner and where they should step out. But the seller's team, the seller's 3 teams that we talked about, can actually help the buyers out by establishing what is a good avatar for our next leader? What does the business need? Where does the business thrive? What does a great buyer for the next stage of this business look like? And the more that the internal team can clarify what that avatar is, one, the easier it is to go out and try to market to find that kind of buyer, but also the more comfort that they're going to be able to have when somebody like myself brings a buyer to the table and I can say, here's how they check all the boxes. This is a great new future partner for you. They're going to be like, oh, so exciting. Let's go. Versus, I don't know this guy. I don't know what he's all about. That type of thing. So determining that avatar on both sides and making sure that you do the work to determine whether or not there's a fit before executing a letter of intent is super important.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So with that, I mean, we've covered a lot. I don't know about you, but my brain's smoking. So I think let's move on and articulate a few good takeaways for our listeners, and let's leave it at that.
Let's do. And these takeaways aren't going to come as a surprise. They're really more of a summary of what we've already covered. So honest assessments of how you and your team are operating and transparent disclosure of your vision and plans, again, at the right time, are cornerstones of success in each element that we've covered in this episode.
Yeah, true indeed. And I get to throw out a little side note here. Something we haven't mentioned, but is really important is how do you know? How do you know if you're on track or not? And with these types of conversations, it's all about relationships between the owner, the team, and the business as it's identified as a brand. And so the easiest way to keep an eye on how you're doing on these things is looking at your turnover metrics. That's going to be a driving metric to keep an eye on where you're at and how much room you have to go. If you're experiencing moderate to high turnover, and how do you know? Benchmark yourself against the industries, right? Because every industry has a different normal for turnover. But if you look at your industry and your turnover rates are higher than normal, then this is going to be something that's going to be exacerbated by a change of control. And it's also typically an identifier of some endemic cultural and communication issues.
Indeed. Indeed. And the final takeaway is just to reiterate what we've said before and what Jason was talking about a couple of minutes ago. Build a buyer avatar that combines what the seller wants and what the team wants. So the buyer avatar needs to take into account what a seller's objectives is going to be. And it's on the shoulders of the business to build that buyer avatar, not on the shoulders of the buyer to decide what that avatar is.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, you have any final comments before I take us out?
The one thing that I would say, and this only occurred to me at this moment, or I would have said it sooner, but the earlier that a business can start to build the buyer avatar, the more power they have in making sure that the business is going to be appealing to that type of buyer. And so this is something that if you're out in front of this and you say, I'm not going to sell for 10 years, but I know what type of buyer I want, that can help shape the type of business you build for the next 10 years as well.
Exactly. And so you've taken us full circle with the comment at the top of the episode that now is the time to work on these things.
Cheers to that.
So on behalf of Jason Tuzinkowicz and myself, we thank you for tuning into this episode, and we look forward to reading your thoughts, questions, topic suggestions, and other requests in the comments section that you see with each episode in this podcast. So we also invite you to click the subscribe button so you can be notified immediately whenever we release future episodes.
That's all for this episode of Boosting Business Value. May your new learning result in the smoothest and most profitable exit strategy for your business. With the right knowledge and guidance, the sky's the limit to what you can do. Do not miss an episode by subscribing to the show. And if you want to learn where your business currently stands, we also have free key opportunity assessments. Find all of them at blueskyadvisors.net/podcast. Thank you for joining us. See you on the next one.